All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the security rabbit hole to another edition, a coughing edition. I'm going to try not to cough as much of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raf, flying solo, and I've got a pretty interesting show. I've been on a tracking the malware kick lately with as much crazy the FRB and many other entities getting popped. So who do I go to when there's bad guys afoot that need to be tracked? Well, my buddy Karim Hijazi, welcome back, buddy.
Good to see you, Raf. Sorry about the cough. Hope you feel all right after the show.
Yeah, a little honey, a little lemon, a lot of sleep, and maybe something else after that will get me right. It's just
there you go.
That weird stuff that goes on during the summer here. Anyway, all right. So as I kind of introduced, there have been a spate of, I don't know, we call them escalations. You had the big healthcare company got 17 ways from Sunday. Federal Reserve at the FRB has been allegedly, because there's no official evidence that I think there's like 33 terabytes they're claiming they have.
Yeah, that's juicy.
And that's a lot of data. That's a lot of data on a lot of people. And there's some other ones. So. Am I wrong? Are things escalating a little bit, or is this just run of the mill, same old?
No, they're escalating all right. I think, and I mean, look, this is I'll preface it with some opinion here. A couple of years ago, I had started looking at the FBI estimates of how much these ransomware operators were taken down. Right. I think the last big one that I saw, there's probably a new stat, but the one I remember was in the billions in profit. Raf, like we're talking profit, not like, oh well, street value of whatever and this. No. The profit was in the billions, and I was like, okay. And if they're making that much money, they're going to amp up their operations to start going after everything. Because back 2-3 years ago, they used to have two piles after they cast their net, right? They'd have their premium pile, and they had everything else almost pretty much like, well, we'll eventually get around to that. We're going to go after the premium one so we can go ransom people for like 10, 15, $20 million. Now they're going after the ones they can ransom for 5 million, 1 million, because now they got the resources and they got the automation and everything. So yeah, now I'm not saying that FRB is small. That's the mother lode sort of thing. And I think at least the theory is if it's not true, then it's a attention getter to get more affiliates, which is their game. And we can get into the affiliate stuff later. Yeah, but like the Federal Reserve Board
is one of those targets that will, even to talk about it, it raises eyebrows. It's sort of like, I mean, it's like the New York Stock Exchange or like one of those, right? Like somebody comes back with, I got 50 terabytes out of Visa. You're like, eyebrow raised, right? Okay, I'm listening. And you kind of couple that with the couple episodes back I did about the absolutely awful findings of the GAO that are awful in every way, including what they're measuring, how they're measuring it.
Right.
The fact that they counted vice that they gave 10 years ago is something that, like, I will give you that maybe there's a lot of things that were relevant 10 years ago that are still relevant today. I don't think that number is big, especially if it's actually prescriptive. If it's flowery things like multi-factor authentication is a good idea, like, okay, fine. But so how much more, let me ask this differently. What's the target now? I mean, are we still talking about the phishing lure, land, get somebody to click, land and expand? Does that still work?
It still works. Phishing is absolutely, social engineering your way into the environment is by far still the most prolific method because people are easily hackable, man. I mean, from you and I started our careers 30 years ago, that was the problem, and it's still the problem today.
It's still the problem.
And, unfortunately. I mean, look, there's other ways, no question. These days with the whole, unfortunately, you think about it, if you still go back to the very first kind of patient zero kind of concept, it's usually some sort of phishing effort that facilitated that. Then there's loitering, persistence, harvesting of intellectual property, PII identities, and then they sell them on the dark web, and then people log in. Maybe they're not using malware at that point. Maybe they're logging in through a VPN. But it all originated from someone ultimately being duped into giving the goods up, right? So unfortunately, yes, that is indeed still very viable. And from what I see, at least, it's probably the main vector of how they're getting the persistent tools embedded. No question.
And we keep seeing, had the debate still rages, pay the ransom, don't pay the ransom. Some companies we know have absolutely no choice. Like you pay the ransom or you close shop.
Right.
Have you seen, and you've got a platform, I'm curious to see what you're seeing, but there are, they're not rumors. There's good data that says hospitals and healthcare networks are the target right now, and related entities, things, obviously places that process prescriptions, doctors' offices, insurance companies, right? Things that are in the chain of events, everything from admittance to bill pay to prescriptions, are because those are the systems that have to stay up, like they have to come back.
Exactly right.
Right. So are you seeing more? I mean, that feels despicable in so many ways.
It is. It is. Yeah. I mean, no, 100%. And what's funny is that it's now expanded beyond that. So like in the COVID, in the lockdown era, that was a big deal. You remember how all that manifested, a lot of scandal around that too, admittedly.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, yes, high availability, can't live without some sort of operational capacity. Those are the targets, if you think of it that way. So banks are similar in that capacity. People don't do well when their online banking doesn't show up on their phone.
But arguably banks have, I mean, maybe I'm being naive here, but banks have the means to make these. They spend millions and millions of dollars on cyber. I keep hearing about how the profit centers are leaving hospitals, leaving them with razor thin margins that are disappearing off the American landscape because, not every place can afford to have a hospital. And now you're going to ransomware that. I know, I know there's, as a threat actor, you don't necessarily know that you landed in Podunk, Missouri, and that if you do this, 10 people will die. But I mean, I think it's naive to think that they don't know at least some of that.
Well, worse yet, a lot of times that access brokerage group, to your point, don't even know what they've gotten into. And then they sell that access to an affiliate that couldn't care less.
Yeah.
And that's the other problem. So there's a bit of a, excuse the pun, Chinese wall sometimes between the brokerage of the access and then the user of it that simply is like, hey, this is a payday for me. I couldn't care less, if someone dies. I don't even think they're even thinking that far ahead in terms of what they're going after. And now with the fact that they're force multiplying their delivery of this. Now, I'll go a little darker on this. This is kind of creepy, man. Sad and frustrating. So it used to be, ransomware deployed. My stuff's all encrypted. I got to buy the key. That's where I'm going to pay the ransom. Now it's more, they've gotten in, they've harvested all my information already. So they have a copy of it on the outside of the company. They've actually encrypted everything I have. So basically buying the key maybe gets me this stuff decrypted, but in most cases it's just a ploy to get the data, or just a ploy to get more money, sorry. And then if they don't comply, then they sell the data still. And if they do buy the key, they still sell the data. So it's like, oh my gosh. And then in many cases, they just don't ever get anything that works right. They'll use technology that fails to encrypt properly, and then you can't decrypt. So sometimes with every intention to give them a key if they pay, doesn't work. So this idea that it's gonna, if we pay, we're gonna be okay is a fallacy as well. That's another part of this that makes it all the more just, insult after injury, frankly. It's just rough.
Yeah. What's your take on how many of these major, I mean, there's obviously thousands, but there's got to be a couple major families, I guess I would say, right, of this, of the kit. How many of those are there? Is that number growing? Because this is lucrative business, so why wouldn't it, right?
In a way. So the affiliates are growing without question. That's kind of coming in droves because the more desperate groups get, or, and there's a lot of that there. But I think, look, you go type in ransomware into Google today and you look at the news headlines. I would venture to say 6 out of the 8 actor attributions is Lockbit, the Russian group, right? That's probably what they're going to say is the primary motivated group behind it. There's a lot of others, and the problem is this is the difficult part about attribution. There was Conti Group that was all in the news for a while there. Five Hands, those ages ago. But, in other words, but the thing is that I don't know, I can't say definitively that these are distinctly air-gapped groups. I think there's a lot of cooperation. And then to go even one step further, Raf, which is really fascinating from an academic standpoint, there is crossover into nation-state activity and political motivation. It's not just financial anymore. So ransomware is being used as a tool that way too.
Yeah, I imagine it would be because you got Iran, Russia, North Korea, China. These are all hostile nations to the United States and in our interests. Why wouldn't, I mean, Russia looks the other way at very least. There's enough evidence to support that China actually has people on payroll. This is what they do because that's how they fund some of the things. It turns out when you can't innovate, you steal from those that do and produce a cheap knockoff. Welcome to the way from China. I think Iran as a threat actor is got a very unique bone to pick with America on a religious level, and just we hate the West. And I think frankly, North Koreans and the genius running the place over there probably aren't too much different than the Russians in terms of being isolated. So YOLO. And it's interesting because why would you not bankroll these groups? Because you ultimately give them, hey, go disrupt this infrastructure, go do this. And by the way, if you make $5 million, $10 million, $2 billion along the way, cool, pocket it. Nobody's going to stop you. We're not going to say, anything.
Right. And there's another, this is a rarely used term, or I should say not as prolific as obviously ransomware is, but you've heard wiperware, right? This is kind of and wiperware is generally attributed to like the Iranians, right? They're pretty much like, none should be making money on this, more interested in creating mass chaos and frustration, frustrate the enemy, go destroy things, right? And so in a lot of ways, depending on the situation, and certainly when you start applying the political overlay on this, it starts to get really interesting. And we were talking about this right before we got this recording going. There's that competition manifesting between various groups. So they'll use their competitor as a patsy to get caught by a hopeful security team that's like, we got them, and then they go out for beers, and then the real threat actor that's much more sophisticated is laying in wait, doesn't beacon for the next 2 months, and is able to stay there, persisting in there until Memorial Day or some holiday or Christmas.
Well, that's the change I think that I find significant. There's more volume from my reading. There's more volume of so there's less threat actors using threat actor infrastructure, and more threat actors using perfectly legitimate, completely unknowing infrastructure that is a hospital, a payroll company, a fast food chain, the corner drugstore, like Bob's lawnmower service, because their reputation is fine until it's not.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a conduit to a bunch of other things that get you there, right? So, for example, the car dealership hack. CDK. Just under a week. Yeah, CDK. That one's classic, right? Because someone was talking to me about that, and they're like, "Oh man, those car dealerships must be absolutely mortified." I'm sure they are, but even worse so, think about what is being collated and correlated on that data. Every organization that's bought cars in fleets, every individual that's paid outright for a car versus getting a loan, all the loan information, all the credit information, that's a target. That's a target list. Right. So not only was that a target for its own level of harvesting to get money possibly, now it just begets a whole other extrapolated list of targets that they can go after. And I saw a spike myself. So that's an interesting, and the thing is, I think we're going to see, unfortunately, I'm going to launch my one buzzword of the day with the augmentation and automation that is now being employed with these things, especially phishing emails. They're going to go after the common person at this point that can pay $5,000 in ransom by saying, well, there's stuff on your computer that you don't want anyone to know about. So
yeah, your browser history.
100%. And they'll plant it. That's it. And
Yeah.
so it's pretty scary stuff, man. I don't know when that'll get down to the common person, but I think it's not that far off considering the volume of traffic and everything that we're seeing flying around as malicious. It's pretty bad.
I think it might be inevitable, right? Because it started there for a while, then it went, and they figured out it was pretty hard.
Yeah.
Numbers were small, and then they caught business, and then they're like, this is easy money.
Yeah.
And it seems like the smaller incursions fueled the money to take the next bigger steps, which then gave them data to now sell and make money off
Exactly.
of, and ransom to collect. And now they're double dipping. And then, they're doing a bigger one. And this is gonna, it's gotta, I don't know, there's a lot of companies out there, but I gotta wonder, are these guys gonna start actually competing at some point? Because how many times can you ransom a company, right? There's a finite amount of organizations that can actually pay or will.
Well, it's true. I think this is where it gets interesting, where, again, I had this ridiculous analogy someone told me, but I thought it's pretty accurate. It sounds so funny, but it's worthy for your audience to laugh at. You ever see an ostrich farm, Raph?
No.
I'm not kidding when I say literally, like the bird, the ostrich.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine goes, yeah, it's one of like most profitable things ever. And I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And they're like, no, you don't get it, do you? You raise an ostrich and you can use the feathers, the skin. My wife would love a portion of that ostrich or whatever the hell, or something. The meat is actually just as good as like beef, right? And it's like super nutrient filled. And then what they use bones for, there's apparently some use for it. The whole damn thing is absolutely useful, right? Like, and it uses very little water. It's ridiculous. My analogy here is that the way they're looking at organizations now is they're like, all right, we'll fillet it. We'll throw that into chuck to make burgers. We'll use that to make Jell-O, and we'll use that to make soap. And they're basically saying, okay, if we can't ransom them for money, no problem, we'll sell their data. If we can't do that, we'll leverage them into access to their partners. Can't use them for that, we'll do this with their home employees and everything else. So we'll just
holy cow, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So the thing is that it's definitely no longer kind of one trick pony sort of approach. It's like, let's slice and dice and make good use of this carcass in the best way we can. It sounds terrible to put it that way, but that's very much the way these guys are looking at their kill. It's just sort of the reality.
All right, so
yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you. You've seen and you've got a platform that tracks this stuff. Do you have something you could show me that kind of gives me like where are they coming from, who's the most active from a country perspective? I have a feeling I know. It's this big red country, so out in the east.
Yeah, but there's a ton. Well, what I'll do, let me see. We I think we'll try to the screen share. Let's see if this maybe works. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that, for the sake of everyone, no one freaks out. I'm not going to be showing any company names here, so keep the innocent protected. All right, let me see. All right, can you guys see the screen?
Yes, I can. Absolutely, yes.
All right, rock and roll.
DNS
So
request by date. All right, you got 30-day rolling DNS requests. So these are
exactly. These are beacons from malicious, from malware deployed into victims, which is pretty terrifying. And if you look at this is a really pretty nasty stat. See, on average, about 10,000 completely net new IPs every day from victims.
Hold on, per day?
Yeah, per day. Yeah, that's per day. So that's literally, you extrapolate that out. I mean, some of the many IPs could be from one organization, but not always, right? That's sometimes one egress IP. So that could be thousands of new victims identified, net new, never seen before in the platform prior to the prior day. So it's pretty dramatic. So
I've always
scary
wondered.
stuff.
I've always wondered how because registering domains and stuff like that is a great way to effectively obfuscate, right?
Yeah.
And there's domain registrars that simply have absolutely no care for law enforcement. They're in
Totally.
Non-extradition countries and all that. How do you get? So you got data in here. How the hell do you get your data? I don't want to ask it.
So
top secret, but
no. I mean, I'll share to the degree that it makes sense. So as you can imagine, I couldn't possibly canvass the world's organizations and governments with my sensors. It just doesn't. The world's tried that already for the last 30 years. Every big company kind of gets their technology deployed into their endpoints and this and that. And they get great data, admittedly. That's cool stuff. I've taken the reverse approach, as you probably know, Raf. We've talked about it several seasons into this. I'm going after, and with legal support, go after the infrastructure the bad guys are setting up that is the bottleneck of collection. So they're basically saying, deploy all our malware out into the wild, that net that they're casting, and when that malware beacons back, we'll collect where they are, what they're doing, and the reconnaissance that comes with it. I'm essentially taking the place of that collection apparatus that those guys set up, which is really, really interesting way to collect data. That's how I can see it from a country perspective. So we'll just plop China in here for the fun of it.
Yeah.
And literally, that gives me, go ahead, Ruff. Yeah.
So these stats, IP count, these are known malicious IPs?
These are known malicious IPs. That's how many beacons are going on a day-to-day basis, literally. And it's an average, and it's pretty amazing. So what's really fascinating is when you start comparing one country to another, and you start saying what's actually happened, what's caused influxes of this or that. India is always really interesting lately with a lot of stuff going on there. And you can see that when I look at data from a country perspective, I can sometimes see spikes in when something's happening. And when I cross-reference that with geopolitical events, like a speech made by Putin, or there's some sort of new policy that's been driven, or Biden says something or whatever, that's what correlates to this. And usually there's a small parallax. So something's said and then something happens. Something said and something happens. So
it kind of seems like they're always busy.
Oh, it's always busy, yes. But what they're doing is they're intelligent control on their implants, right? They're saying, oh, they're going to go buckle down on this. Let's cool your jets and don't call me every 15 seconds. Go every 2 weeks. Or go every couple months, and then they completely avoid things like NDR and XDR tools that are waiting from some sort of pattern analysis of some kind. So
totally different. It's slow.
Hugely, right? So the beautiful part about what we're doing is that we have such a massively wide aperture for time. We get to see all the things that are happening that others simply can't, because we're not looking for it. It's kind of looking for us, and that's kind of the differential.
All right. So, I mean, target requests, those are, what are target requests?
Oh, yeah. So that's actual, I've got something stolen from this organization. I'm sending it out through the firewall of the organization. So that's harvested intellectual property, PII, payload, reconnaissance, or Cobalt Strike being deployed for ransomware actors that are saying, here's the entire network telemetry and topography and taxonomy, now deploy the ransomware. So that's that collection that the threat actor is collecting to then make a decision that that's a worthy target. I got the CEO's computer, I got their backups, I got their business continuity systems. Now let's deploy ransomware. So that's what I'm able to see. Usually, I can't do it for everyone, but for my customers, for example, I'll give them, hey, you've got a deployment of a tool that's harvesting information about your network. Kill the spy before they send in the ransomware. So we can kind of preempt it, which is the whole goal. Can't do it always, but that's the goal.
Yeah, because you always think that it's easy to fall into the, well, they're going to jump in and they're going to do the thing right off, right? They're not going to necessarily, they're not going to do that, because we're still, some of us are still in that old mentality where you jump in, you land on a machine, you've got all the data you need, but there's multiple stages to this, and this just sort of gives us that viewpoint into that. Yeah,
exactly. And so this is cool. And what I should do is I'm going to create Raf's list here, and I'll give you access to this thing. Yeah. Well, what's cool about it is this is fun. It'll be fun for your audience to kind of see how this works, because no one really gets how this all actually works. So literally what we can do here is we can say, what's interesting to you? Let's say you were, I don't know, Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. You got a huge supply chain ecosystem of smaller companies. So literally what we'll do for them is we'll say, all right, I don't know, a company out of Atlanta. I'm just going to put Atlanta in there. I'm not going to add anything. And in no way is this list an indictment of any of these companies or countries or whatever. But I can say, oh yeah, City of Atlanta is a huge partner of XYZ, or Atlanta Forklifts is. And we can literally add them to this watch list. And if anything actually beacons out from those organizations, we'll know. And then we can tell. Yeah. So it's a pretty cool way to look at the system from the outside without ever deploying. I don't know any of these companies, right? I just arbitrarily pick something. I could say, oh, well, Raf's list also has an interest in companies in Botswana. I don't know. I'm coming up with saying that would make it very clear that I wouldn't have any connection to them. So there you go. University of Botswana. That's one that you're really interested in.
It's a pretty good university, apparently.
Apparently. So yeah, so there's no limit to what we can kind of watch in a passive capacity, because we're simply waiting for something to manifest in that environment and then beacon out, which is pretty cool. So that's what gives me that perspective, Ralph. Yeah.
That's interesting. So when you were looking at that report, before you started doing all the country filters, I noticed the United States was on there.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So U.S. is.
How the hell are we at the top?
Well, unfortunately, we have a huge amount of infrastructure. That's a big one. Now, what's ironic about it is look at the differential. So the UK actually tops us as far as data exfiltration happening.
Yeah.
Even beyond us. We have a lot of malware communicating to their command and control domains, but the UK actually beats us as a country for harvesting information. And the reason for it, I didn't know this until I finally spoke with someone in intelligence in the UK. They said, oh yeah, we know exactly why that. I'm like, please tell me, because I've been wondering about this the entire time I've been stating these numbers. And they're like, because we're the banking hub of the world. More prolifically in the UK than it even does in the US, which is, and maybe it's a testament to our security here. I'd like to think that as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So thanks for the thanks for that. That's a lot of data. And I'm curious because there doesn't seem to be an end to this. Like viruses ended up in sort of a natural downward cycle because we found better ways to do what we want. Like we found something that was more profitable and frankly easier.
Yeah. Right.
Ransomware seems like it is the thing, like it is the gift that's going to keep on giving well into the future.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I think there's no way it's going away. I mean, Raph, it's interesting because, people are asking me a little bit about, well, as a parallel, right? Is there a situation here where, can we see a change? Will there be a change? Will they stop using things like DNS? And I'm like, why would they ever do it? Why would they ever stop? It's too cheap to do. It's the infrastructure of the internet. It's the plumbing. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever why we would ever do away with that. Why would they ever do it? So the same goes for ransomware. It's just too profitable. I don't see that changing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you bring up DNS because I've seen situations where, because at the day job, obviously we watch networks, right? And watch packets from the inside though. Yeah. And there's people that are like, well, I've got advanced firewalls, I've got EDR, I don't have any of these issues. Yeah. And you sort of look at the data and you go, hey, so yes, you have an internal DNS forwarder. Everybody's talking through that one to the outside, except for that guy.
Yeah.
And that guy's sending sparse requests, but they're huge. And they're like, well, but they're DNS requests. The firewall would have blocked them. So it's like, yes, it's an RFC compliant DNS request. Mm-hmm. It just happens to contain a spreadsheet inside the request.
Exactly.
Like, holy crap.
Yeah. Well, and that's the funny part is you talk to people about this, and there are some pretty dramatically easy solutions, as you know, where you work. If you simply create some pretty epic egress rules that make sense, especially on DNS, dude, most of my platform would evaporate in terms of the telemetry I would see. I say that very openly because the reality is that I've been saying it for 15 years. If you just limit egress, no, it's not. It's gotten worse. And I mean, it sucks because it makes me kind of a black sheep when it comes to the industry sometimes because I'm like, your shit's not working, guys. You know, and no one likes me saying that, but I wouldn't see that much data if it was working, Ralph, admittedly. So,
and that's the thing, right? We're looking at zero trust is now being talked about and everywhere as if it was the goal, the happy savior, the white knight with the big sword that's going to show up. And we're like, yeah, I mean, I get it, but we can't even get network segmentation right. Most of our networks, we don't even know what's on them. Now, I get certain segments we actually care about. You can be like, okay, I'm locking this down and I'm keeping things off. Fine. Sure. But if you're listening to this and going, yeah, we do that, ask yourself, how much of your network are you 100% certain that if you turned off all egress, that something wouldn't break and something business critical wouldn't break?
Right, exactly. And then furthermore, the unfortunate part about zero trust is like once given effectively authorization to communicate, yes, there wasn't necessarily trust there, but if malware, which is built to do, functions like a legitimate user, it doesn't stop the problem. The idea is that I think the concept of zero trust is interesting because people make this assumption that this will somehow limit malicious activity. The truth of the matter is that once it gets in there, it's going to act just like an active user that's legitimately intended to do what it's doing. There's nothing about that. In fact, without disparaging any names, and I'll leave it at this because this gets to be pretty dramatic quickly, and we'll leave it for another chat sometime. But I see a lot of the vendors that are zero trust showing up as the egress point in my platform. So I hate to say it, but that's the reality. That means that it's not being stopped. It's getting through out to the internet. That's not a good story. Yeah.
The preaching you're doing ain't working.
Nope.
All right. Well, fascinating conversation. I appreciate you giving me a walkthrough on some of your data. That's super fascinating. Next time I'll come up with a couple of companies that I'm interested in, but we won't show that because that'll just that'll say.
Yeah, it'll cause a ruckus. No, what we'll do is I'll do some screenshots, redact them, and throw this up or something.
That'd be great. All right, folks. Well, Karim, thank you for joining us. This has been awesome. Keep the good fight, and I don't know what else to do but keep swimming. You know, this is one of those, like, there doesn't seem to be an end to this, except we just got to get in the boat every morning and keep rowing, and switch out for the night shift and just keep going, because this isn't going to end in any like magical way. Like, we haven't solved the criminal mind. We're certainly not solving this. So
it's being incentivized. Frankly, that's the bad part.
That scares me.
Yeah,
that really does scare me. All right, folks, thank you for listening. This has been episode 608 of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Karim Hijazi was my guest, and we talked some scary data on malware. Remember, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of that cold water you may or may not have. And if you already know it, great. There's evidence, more evidence than maybe you even wanted, because sometimes I learn something that makes me uncomfortable. This is certainly one of those conversations. So for the podcast, thanks for listening. Check out the Facebook link. No, the LinkedIn page, the Facebook for professionals, YouTube, and of course, subscribe wherever you listen. Share it with your friends who can become their favorite podcast too.